wait, he's alive. He's alive. Yeah, wait, look.
The king.
Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you. Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you. Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Wait.
Okay, shalom. B Water 89, welcome. I don't think I've seen you in the live chat before. This is DNG 144, or the Draw Nigh to the Greater show here at Take on the World TV. You gotta love that song, right, JJ? I know, I'm telling you, it does help me get in the right mindset and mood for these videos, especially when I'm not in the mood. Sometimes I don't feel like making videos. Tonight's one of those nights. And I wrestled with whether or not I should, but I felt like I was supposed to. It's probably going to be short and simple. But since we did the John the Baptist video a few days ago, for anybody who's not familiar, it's the Johnny B. I had a Jeremiah Dirt. I had good old Mr. Dirt with me. And it was a pretty epic video. I went through it pretty fast, a lot of information. I had more than a couple people tell me that they're going to rewatch it at like 3/4 speed. I usually watch things at 1.5, 2 times speed, and they're saying I was going so fast they needed to cut it down. Oh, Soul Seeds. Okay, B Water. Okay. I do remember a name of Soul Seeds. Shalom to Shuva. I think I've seen you in here before. Shalom, Karen. Okay, so since we did the Johnny B video, which is going to be helpful for tonight's video, if you haven't seen the Johnny B video after tonight's video, whether you're watching it live or otherwise, you might want to go back and watch the Johnny B one. Because there's going to be some things tonight that I'm going to be alluding to from the Johnny B video. So there's going to be some details that I'm just going to reference. And if you're not familiar with the Johnny B study, you might not catch all of what I'm getting at. But if you did watch the Johnny B video and you're watching this tonight, especially live, you're going to enjoy this. So I've been waiting for over a year, close to 2 years, to do the Johnny B video. And I actually paused our first Samuel studies that we were doing a year ago at chapter 18, because chapter 19 connects with the John Baptist studies. So tonight we're going to do the 1 Samuel 19, and God willing, we'll go into chapter 20. But to be honest with you, I'm not expecting to. I'm prepared to, but I'm not expecting to. So it's going to be nice and short. Okay, so let's go into 1 Samuel chapter 19. Okay, I'm going to read through it fairly quickly. If you've got your scriptures with you, or your eSword or Blue Letter Bible, or whatever app you might be using, feel free to read along. But I'm going to read through it pretty quickly, and then we're going to go back and go over some notes. We're not going to go for verse through verse, word by word. It's not going to be one of those in-depth studies. But we're going to get the main gist, and I've got a few points I'd like to make. Okay, so 1 Samuel chapter 19. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all of his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said to him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against thee, and because his works has been to thee word very good. For he did put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine, and Yahovah wrought a great salvation for all of Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, As Yahovah lives, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from Yahovah was upon Saul, as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him, to slay him in the morning. And Michal, which is like a Michelle, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to David, she said, He is sick. And Saul sent messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said to me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Navith. And it was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at Navith in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they prophesied. And it was told Saul, and he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great wall that is in Seku, and he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? And one said, Behold, they be at Navith and Ramah. And he went thither to Navith and Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Navith and Ramah. He stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, It's all among the prophets. Which is not the only verse that says it, the only time they say that. Okay. Really left you hanging when I stopped this last time. Trying to catch up in the live chat. I'm not sure what you're talking about there, Karen. Unless you're talking to JJ. Robert Johnson. I don't remember that name in here before. Okay, so let's go back through these verses a little bit and go through some notes. Okay. So we see Jonathan, like a messenger of God, telling David that Saul is looking to kill him and instructs him to hide. Makes me think of our escaping, hiding, and flying videos. Hence, we see in the title a very similar, if you're not familiar with those videos, I think we named this one hid, escaped, and fled, right? Because that's what we see in chapter 19 and 20. We see David hiding and then escaping and then fleeing. So it kind of reminds me of those videos we did, the hiding, escaping, flying videos, where we talk about many examples in those scriptures. If you're curious, it's a fun study, 2-part series on that. Okay, so side note here, if you look at secret place here in verse 2, it's H5643, which can mean to cover, covert, hidden, secret, secretive, etc. And this can be in good ways and in bad ways. But what I found interesting is this is the exact same term we see in some other fun verses, like Psalms 18:11, the famous Psalms 27:5. Let's go to that real quick, just for anybody who doesn't know why I say it's famous. Okay, Psalms 27, verse 5. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. And I thought that was really fitting for this section here. Psalms 31:20, Psalms 32:7, Psalms 61:4, Psalms 81:7, Psalms 91:1, Psalms 119:114. These are all verses that have that same word there that is used for secret hiding place here in verse 2. And I thought that they kind of fit for this study, interestingly enough, for anybody who wants to take notes of that and go back through them. I'm not going to right now. Okay, so I love going through Jonathan's conversation here with Saul, right? He's pleading on behalf of David, and he's doing so logically, right? We can see, I find in my personal experiences, okay, and I wanted to just point this out, that arguing in a logic manner, trying to plead a case, whether you're talking court or like at work or with friends or family or whatever, seems to me, in my experience, that going through logical points rather than making your emphasis on emotions carries a lot more weight. It allows you pleading the case to be less emotional in your pleading, and it allows the other person to hear sound logic, and that's what we see Jonathan doing. This is not an emotional plea. We don't see Jonathan arguing that his closeness to David should be a point for Saul to consider. He doesn't say, please let him live because he's my best friend. please let him run and escape, and we'll just kick him out of the city and we won't let him come back. We don't see Jonathan arguing that at all. He's leaving the emotion on the side. And it's not just wise, but also it shows that he actually has a solid case to be argued. And that's one of the reasons why I say it's good to argue logic over emotion, because for me personally, if someone's arguing emotion without the logic, it is very hard for me not to consider that they're doing so because of lack of logic reasoning, if that makes sense. But yeah, we don't see him saying, please don't kill my best friend. Rather, Jonathan pleads concerning David's actual innocence. Look at verse 5 here, showing Jonathan ending on the point that it would be sin to kill David and that it is also without cause. So you see in verse 5 here, he says he put his life in his hand. He's dating back to going against Goliath here. When it says, and he slew the Philistine, David has fought Philistines multiple times. When it says the Philistine, this is actually a reference to Goliath. So Jonathan is bringing back to memory to Saul, saying, remember that time when you yourself wouldn't fight and nobody else would fight? And we agreed to have a champion and then nobody would go against Goliath. He went and did it. And because of him, the battle was won, because he had faith in God. So he's bringing this to memory. He's using history. He's using back points, and he's moving forward. And he says, you rejoice then. So why now would you sin against this innocent blood to slay David without a cause? This is not easy, right? It's not always easy to call it out for what it is. It's not always easy to tell somebody this information, this plot, this plan of yours, these ideas of yours, this thought of yours, this is sin. And yes, this is Jonathan talking to his dad, but he's also talking to the king. And he outright calls him out, and he's not attacking him, but he's calling it for what it is. He's saying this would be sin. This thought of yours would be sin. And just going through that this week, getting ready for tonight's video, that just kept hitting me hard. I'm sitting there thinking, it's not always easy. And I'm not talking about the times when someone's all too eager to point out to somebody else, that would be sin. You know what I'm talking about, right? When people are all too excited to correct somebody else. That's not what I'm talking about. In those situations, there's usually a plank in the eye and they're trying to point out the speck. That's not the case here. And one might say that it could be easier because of family, but I would say often it's harder with family and those that are closer. Is it not? How many of you, in your personal experience, have struggled with telling family that plan, that thing you just said you wanted to do, that would be sin? And you don't want to go about it in a way that you're trying to harp on them, or you're trying to be the police or tell them that you're better than them or anything like that. But how hard can that be sometimes to say, this is not wise, this thing that you want to do. This is not of God. This would actually be sinful to do this. It's not always easy to call it out for what it is, especially when you're calling it sin. And so I just wanted to point that out. You know, I can't help but think that Jonathan would have rather not confronted his dad at all, but because of the severity of the situation, because of the desperation of the situation, he couldn't not go. He had to do it. You look at verse 7 there, it states that Jonathan brought David to Saul as a mediator, rather than just simply going back to David and saying, okay, go back, return, go back, right? So this there's a few things to this, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but simply put, he acted as the mediator, and so therefore he felt that it was a godly thing to bring him back, to be present in the situation. It says Jonathan brought David to Saul as he was in his presence, as in times past. And we're going to see a callback to this later, either in tonight's video or in the next one. But we will see a callback to that in another conversation between David and Jonathan. You see in verse 9, it says the evil spirit from Yahovah was upon Saul, right? Now, we talked about this in the 1 Samuel videos before. We've talked about this in multiple other DNG 144 videos, giving more than a couple examples throughout Scripture where you see an evil spirit sent out by God. And we've talked about this in more than one video about how that does not make God evil, and how often skeptics and atheists will twist it, but how we are supposed to view it scripturally. It's not a short study to go into those things when you struggle with that concept. But then once you understand God is just, God is holy, and just because he allows there to be a purpose with an evil spirit does not mean that God desires evil. This is like the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh. This is the whole free will, predestination. Can the two coexist? Are they actually contradictive? Again, Dirt and I have actually done a couple of videos on that, so I'm not going to go too much into that tonight. But I wanted to bring this up in verse 9 here because I think it's often skipped and missed. When people think about Saul versus David, and they think about how evil and wicked Saul was, and how David was constantly on the run and giving him more chances than he should have seemed, and when David had every chance to kill him, he wouldn't. It seems it's often skipped that David received the Spirit upon him, the Spirit of God. And we talked about this in the last 1 Samuel video, the Let Go video. We talked about how it seems simultaneously back in 1 Samuel 18. Right? No, actually, that goes all the way back to 1 Samuel 16, verses 13 to 15 here. I'm looking at my notes now. And it shows simultaneously David receiving the Spirit upon him. And then the very next verse says, and then the Spirit departed from Saul. So it seemed like it was like simultaneous. And that's when the evil spirit begins to trouble Saul. So we probably talked about this in a couple 1 Samuel videos. But for anybody who wants to look into that type of study and hasn't before, if you've got pen and paper real quick, I'll give you a few verses to consider going into that study. So 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11, Romans chapter 1, verse 28, 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 20 to 23, and it has a mirroring verse in 2 Chronicles 18, verses 20 to 22 for anybody who's interested. It's a whole study on its own. But, you don't want to cherry pick just those type of verses and leave them be when you see Yah allowing someone to be turned over to a reprobate mind, and when you see the hardening of hearts and things of this nature. You need to look at the context and consider all of what Scripture says about God. Okay, but the point I wanted to bring up, which is another point we've already discussed in 1 Samuel videos, is the second part of this verse. The evil spirit was from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with the javelin in his hand. It's in his hand already. And David played with his. We get to see that opposing, it's funny because, it's the work of your hands. It shows already readily available. And, the work of your hands shows the condition of your heart. Out of the heart comes the abundance of the words through your mouth. It comes from your heart. Same with the work of your hands. So I just thought how poetic. What is my take on the 144,000? I'm not getting into that tonight, Jeff. We're here talking about 1 Samuel 19. I'm not getting into Revelations in the 144,000. But yeah, I find that poetic and fitting. And I don't think it's just poetic language. Some would argue that it is just poetic language. But we see a very physical thing here. And we see not only did he have the javelin in his hand and David's playing with his hand. When David played, right, and it says harp in most Bible versions, but most understand now that it was more likely kind of like a guitar, like a sitar, right, or like a mandolin. So not so much of a harp. Although, it's interesting because I've tried looking into it, and in Psalms and things, David says he's going to play on 10-stringed instruments. And so I couldn't find any harps with 10 strings, but it's also hard to find mandolin guitar things with 10 strings. So I think that's very interesting. But we see that this is a very physical thing. It's a very literal thing. It's not just a metaphor, because in the very next verse, in verse 10 there, Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence and smote the javelin into the wall. David fled and escaped that night. Okay, so did he throw it? And as, I see in my mind like a LOTR type of scene, if you guys are familiar with what I'm talking about, where they have that king of like Rohan, and they have that worm tongue evil guy who's been whispering into his ears. That's how I would do this if I was a director. I would have a being that you can't see representing the evil spirit speaking into the ear of the king, and then they, when the camera would go back to David and you'd see Saul from there, and when David would look at Saul, you wouldn't see that being, but then you'd see the the person speaking things into Saul's ears. When he's sitting there and David's playing, it says David played with his hand. When David played, it was to rid Saul of the evil spirits that were tormenting him. If you go all the way back to 1 Samuel 15, 16, 17, 18, you're going to see that that's why David was there playing. So David's there trying to soothe Saul, and he's trying to do spiritual combat through music and worship. Meanwhile, Saul's hand is gripping a javelin with thoughts in his heart and his mind of, I bet you he thinks he's better than me. Those people talk about how, I've killed my thousands, but he's killed tens of thousands. There's, what is there between me and him except for the throne? David was already anointed at this point to be the next king. Saul was already told that there's a better one coming. Lyre, harp, 10-string, lacewood. Yeah, it's a lyre. Okay. I've seen multiple arguments on this, Karen, on what instrument it is. I'll have to check that out later, Karen. But it's interesting. He's already got it in his hand, and he's already his heart and that evil spirit upon him. He keeps trying to trap David. He keeps trying to trick him into things. And he had already early in this chapter, just 9 verses back, we see Saul telling his servants and Jonathan, we need to kill David. And he's sitting there watching him play, thinking, why don't I just do it now? Why don't I just do it now? And so whether David felt it in the spirit of him gripping and leaning forward, getting ready to throw it, or if as he started to get ready, David knew and got up and took off, your guess is as good as mine. But he was able to slip away, and this wasn't the first time. In fact, I would argue that it's the third time. Many people say it was the second time, but if you go back to 1 Samuel 18, verses 8 to 12, it says twice there. And a lot of people argue that twice is referring to this one here, but I'm not convinced of that. So I think this is a third time. But whether it be twice or third, every time I read this, I can't help but think, man, I am not David, because you throw a javelin at me, I'm not coming back to the court. I'm not going to come back and play worship music for you to calm down. But David had a lot of respect to the anointing. And David was trying his best to be a godly man in what he understood it to be. Okay. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him. Sounds like they're kind of standing guard. They're outside. Either Michal overheard it or she looked out the window and saw him, right? But they're waiting until the next morning to slay him, which is a God thing. This is one of those what they call God things, right? People say that. So Michal tells David, you have to leave tonight, because if you stay till the morning, they're going to kill you. So Michal lets him down through a window. He went and fled and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for the bolster and covered it with a cloth. Okay, for those of you who listened to the John the Baptist video 3 days ago, you know where I'm going with this, right? But we're going to go into this with some verse backup that I didn't use in the Johnny B video. But for those who haven't watched the Johnny B video, you might not catch on to what I'm getting at here. So let's break this down a little bit. Michal took an image. Okay, so first off, she has an image, right? Now, usually, depending on what Bible version you have, it might say something else. It might say something like idol or something, right? Why does she have an image readily available? You ever wonder that? You ever think that when reading this, going, wait a minute, she's got a household idol? What was she doing with a household idol? Let's keep in mind that it actually pleased Saul for David to marry Michal instead of Merab, the one promised to David. If you go back to 1 Samuel 18, verse 19, we can see that Saul actually expected Michal to be a snare to him. So Michal, the one that David married, wasn't actually the one that David had expected to marry, but when it came time for David to marry that daughter, she had already been married off. And if you watched our last 1 Samuel video from like a year ago, maybe you remember that, or if you're familiar with these scriptures and you've studied it out, you'll notice that. But we go to verse 18, verse 19 here. But it came time to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David. She was given to Adriel the Mahalathite. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Why? Right? Look at verse 21 here. In chapter 18, Saul said, I will give him her, talking about Michal, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, thou shalt this day be my son-in-law, and one of the twain. So Saul was pleased with David marrying Michal. He automatically, the moment they said Michal would be a good wife, his first thoughts are, we could use her to trap David. The thing pleased him that she might be a snare to him. So perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised that she had easy access, quick, readily available access. Chances are she didn't leave the house to go get this image. So let's look at the word image. In 1 Samuel 19. Let's see, what verse was it here? I had to go back to the 18 to look at that. Okay, chapter 19, verse 13. We look at that word image, and it's teraphim. Teraphim. Okay, now this only pops up 15 times in the King James. And those 15 times aren't even 15 different stories. It's actually only like a handful of times. Okay, we need to consider that the word teraphim here is not pesel for graven or carved idol. It's not Elohim, meaning gods. And it's not masekah, which means molten or metal idol. It's not even Gilul, which is what I would have expected. And that's the more simple term, simply meaning idol. Okay, now these are the words that are more commonly used throughout Scripture when you're looking for idolatry. Okay, you'll see pesel will mean graven or carved, right? Whether it be of wood or whatever. Elohim for many gods, you'll see that for some idols. Masekah for molten or metal, right? It's been shaped. And we'll see Gilul, which is more simple. It just means idol. But none of those terms are actually being used here. Gilul is the type that I would have expected if it was just a simple idol. But it's being specified here as to not being the carved and shaped, not being the metal, and not being just a simple idol. So let's look at the handful of examples we have in Scripture of teraphim and what kind of form of idolatry, and see if we can't see a little bit more in Scripture what I talked about in the Johnny B video according to the Targums of Jonathan and Jasher. So we can see teraphim in Genesis 31 referring to the idols or gods of Laban that Rachel stole. And we talked about why in the Johnny B video, why what I think teraphim were and are would represent that Rachel didn't steal them for false god worship, but rather to keep her dad from figuring out where they were going. Let's look at Judges chapter 17 to 18. Here you have teraphim listed with other false god worship types. So it's specified, again, showing that this is not just another word for the same thing. If you go look in Judges 17, right, and this is about Micah, a man who had taken a Levitical priest, brought him to his house to do his worship in his house, and the Danites are going through, and this is that Levite that they take him and the idols out of Micah's house, and Micah's like, whoa, where are you guys going? And they convinced the Levite to come and do false god worship for the tribe of Dan. And, they said, wouldn't it be better to be a Levite for a whole tribe than it would be for one house? When you go over to Judges chapter 14 or 17, verse 4, they mention paying for a carved graven idol and a molten metal idol. These are two types of idols that we see Micah and his mother paying someone to make. But in verse 5, it talks about them themselves making a teraphim without the idol maker that's mentioned in verse 4. Then notice the distinguished list of differing idols. So if you go to chapter 18, this is Judges chapter 18, verses 14, 17, 18, and 20. You will see that they list out the other idols. They list out a carved or graven idol. They list out the molten metal idols, and then they list teraphim. It is not the same thing. There is no need to share three different words for the same thing. Then they took the idols and the idols and the idols. No. Then they took the carved idols and the molten idols and the teraphim. This is something different. Okay, JJ, I'll hit you up. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 19. Abriel. It's been a while since I've asked you how to pronounce that. But yeah, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 19. So this is different. right? Oh, if you're asking where we're at right now, I was looking at Judges 17 and 18, showing Micah. Okay, let's go over to 1 Samuel 15:23. This was a really good example. 1 Samuel 15:23, for rebellion is as sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. But that word idolatry is teraphim. Well, how fitting is that if teraphim is what I said it was in the Johnny B video? You know, how often do we see this verse? People say rebellion is like witchcraft, stubbornness is like idolatry. But when you see teraphim meaning not just simple idolatry, but a very specific form of idolatry, well, that verse starts to take on a lot more depth, doesn't it? We see this teraphim again in 2 Kings 23, verse 24. Check this out. Moreover, the workers with familiar spirits, the wizards, and the teraphim, and the idols. Look at that. And the teraphim, comma, and the idols, comma. The word idols there being gilul, meaning all types of idols. So teraphim is something different. Hence why the King James uses the word images for teraphim, because they don't really know what to say, what it is. They just know it's different. Ezekiel chapter 21, verse 21, for the king of Babylon stood at the parting of the way at the head of the two ways to use divination. Look at that. The context here is divination. He made his arrows bright, and he consulted with idols? No, he consulted with teraphim. It says he looked into the liver. Interesting. Hosea chapter 3, verse 4. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king and without a prince and without a sacrifice and without an image, right, in the King James. And this is matzebah, which means a pillar or a pillar type of idol, and without an ephod and without teraphim, which they suggest means family idols because they don't know what else to call it, as they will admit in their commentaries. Look at Zechariah chapter 10, verse 2. For the teraphim have spoken vanity. You guys. I had to use this. Zechariah 10, verse 2. For the teraphim, not just any kind of idol, the teraphim have spoken vanity. And the diviners have seen a lie and have told false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore they went their way as a flock, and they were troubled because there was no shepherd. That's Zechariah chapter 10, verse 2. Now, if you watch the Johnny B video, where I used all kinds of extra biblical accounts and went into the Templar Knights and talked about Herod's wife and all that stuff. And tonight now, we're showing scripture connecting teraphim with speaking, with divination. Certain types of witchcraft and sorcery. This is not just a normal idol. It's not just an image. Now, if you watch the Johnny B video, you might understand, you might connect a lot more as to why Michal would use that type of a idol, if you will, to put in the bed to pretend to be David. Notice it says that she uses a pillow of goat's hair. Do you remember in the Johnny B video when I mentioned that they had to shave the head and then use spices and herbs? So Michal said he was sick, and she said this seemingly to buy time. And she said that that's why he couldn't come to the door. And it seems to me that she actually did buy time, because we see the messengers actually went back. And I say that because we see in verse 15 that it says that Saul sent them out again. So it did buy David some fleeing time, some time to run to Samuel. So they go in and they realize the Ferris Bueller trick. And Saul asked Michal why she would lie in helping his enemy and foe. And I every time I read that, I'm like, your enemy? According to who? According to his poisoned heart. According to the evil spirit on his shoulders. According to his reprobate mind, his wicked mind state. David doesn't see himself as the enemy of Saul. Nobody sees David as the enemy of Saul except for Saul. The threat to the throne. So we see in verse 17, Michal makes it look like David was threatening her. Again, no surprise. that her character wasn't godly, considering how Saul said he wanted to trap David with her. It's sad, it's sad. And I'd love to say that this is a thing of the past and not anymore, but we see it even now, right? In the secular world, people will say some not so nice things about their own family, and then will even try to benefit from it. Oh, I know so and so would be quick to do something they shouldn't in this manner. Let's use them to do this. I know my cousin would do this. The rest of them wouldn't do it, but he'd be willing to stoop that low. Saul was willing to use his daughter to marry David in order to try to trap him and kill him. That's so sad. And it was brought to Saul's attention because it said that Michal was interested. She liked David. She wanted to marry him. She was attracted to him, at least, right? You find out your child is interested in marrying somebody else who just so happens to be the hero of your kingdom at the moment, and your first thought is, yeah, that might work. We'll trap him and kill him that way through my daughter. And it's just sad, And we see that she's not a godly person, but I mean, look who she's being raised by. Look at the kingdom state at that moment, It's sad. And so I'm thinking about this, about Saul using Michal as a snare. And I went through some verses, and I've got a few here, but there's one in particular that I thought really fit for tonight. Psalms 141, verses 9 to 10, specifically verse 10. Keep me from the snares which they have laid for me, and the gins of the workers of iniquity. Let the wicked fall into their own nets, whilst that I withal escape. Keep in mind, this is written in the Psalms. Yes, I would attach it to certain forms of necromancy, but Mitzi, did you catch the Johnny B video? Because it's a very specific type of necromancy and divination. If you didn't catch the Johnny B video, you're going to want to go back and check that out. I think you would really enjoy that. We also see other verses with the same sentiment. Not as cool as that verse, though, right? With David escaping and Saul being ensnared by his own snare. Michal was supposed to be the trap, and it was used against him. It was because of Michal that David got away. It was because of Michal that David got time to get away. His own snare, his own trap was used against him. Just like that prayer we see in Psalms 141, verses 9 to 10. I just thought that was too cool. But you can see other verses of the same kind of thing. Some of the ones that jumped out on me is like Psalms 5:10. That has a phrase in there, let them fall by their own counsels, Psalms 35, verse 1 through 4. And I thought that was kind of neat because it has the context of, asking God to come out with a spear and shield, right? And you have that spear javelin thing, and stopping the way of those persecuting the righteous, which would be Saul chasing after David here. Okay, so David flees. And he flees to Samuel, which makes sense. If you've read the book of 1 Samuel, at least up to this point, then it would make a lot of sense that David would go to Samuel. Samuel the prophet is like the prophet of the time, right? One of the best prophets ever. But it's also the prophet that anointed David. So there's a connection there. And so David thinks, I got to get somewhere safe. I got to get to somebody godly. I need wise, godly counsel. I need a godly, righteous man, a holy man. Samuel, of course. So it goes to Samuel, who's still in Ramah, right? Which is where we saw all throughout 1 Samuel that's where he went to live. And, okay, so we look at Ramah. And, you guys know me. I like to look at meanings and names and things like that. So if you look at Ramah, it actually means height. But if you look at Navith, it means resting place, home, or residence. And so I started looking into this a little bit. I didn't do too heavy of a study, right? But let's look at the verses here. He went to Samuel, and then he went to Ramah to Samuel, but he went to Navith. It was told to Saul. He's at Navith in Ramah, and Saul sent messengers to take David when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing appointed over them. So, in a lot of the commentary studies that I did on this and studied on this, it seems that it's understood that Navith is quite likely a neighborhood that was specifically dedicated to where a number of young men would be trained for the prophetic office. So like when you see the sons of the prophets in Jericho, the ones that watched Elijah and Elisha, and then they saw Elisha come back and smack the Jordan and say, "Where's the God of Elijah?" And then the water opened and they said, he's got the mantle of Elijah. This would be them. This would be that type, not those specific guys, but this would be those young prophets in training, being trained by Samuel. Thus why it would say standing and appointed over them. So it seems like, the Spirit's doing his thing, but it seems like this area, this Navith, this neighborhood, this resting residence meant to train young prophets for the prophet office would be so spiritually charged, like electrically in the air, And so we see Saul sending messengers, and they come to get David, and instead they end up prophesying. And he sends more messengers, and again they prophesy. And then he sends another group of messengers, and again they prophesy. And this reminds me of a few places, right? This reminds me of when Saul is first going out looking for his, lost donkeys for his dad, when Samuel took him and anointed him. He was amongst the prophets, and then Saul was prophesying, right? It also reminds me of the 3 sets of soldiers that were sent for Elisha, right? And he said, if I'm of God, then let fire come down. And so Saul says, all right, I'm going to go myself. If you're going to have it done, you got to do it right. You got to do it yourself. If it's going to be done right, you got to do it yourself. So he goes, and he asks along the way, where are they at? And they said, Navith. And he went to Navith and Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. This is the first time we see the Spirit of God upon Saul since we see it being taken away back in 1 Samuel 16. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Navith. So before he was even there in the presence of David and Samuel, he's already prophesying amidst the prophets. Ooh, nice one, Karen. Thank you for that. You always have a good chat when they help you with notes that you yourself missed while listening to your video. That's probably a good assumption there. I'm not going to say it's 100% accurate because I haven't looked into it, but I'm betting Karen's right here. It says he stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner and lay down naked all that day. Now, a lot of times pastors are quick to say, okay, hold on. When it says naked, we're not talking naked. We're talking getting down to his skivvies. And that is more likely the case. But I think it's funny because I see that verse and you want to mention it, and then it's like, why are we so quick to try to censor things so much? I mean, they're probably right in this sense. They're probably right here that he really did strip down from his outer garments into his skivvies. But why is that always such a issue to emphasize? Like, we're afraid that the Bible is going to scare people off. Have you read what's in the Bible? There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in here. All kinds of things that are not good things. All kinds of gory details. I'm not the only one that constantly says that if we have these Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Hunger Games and all these things, you could take Bible stories and use the same cinematic presence, and it would be 10 times better. And it would be true. Real, true history. And it reminds me of that comedian. I can't remember his name, but he has a little skit, and he talks about, Isaiah got naked. Jeff's right about that. Yeah, there is a difference there. But there's that comedian, and he talks about the different ways that people worship in church. They're carrying the TV and things like that. And he was talking about he was playing a song about Samson, and he gets to the part towards the end when they gouge out his eyes. He really fast towards the end. He's like, and then they gouged out his eyes and beat him and da. And he's like, this is a Bible story, ladies and gentlemen, and they all laugh. And it's funny, but it's not funny, because that's where so much of Christianity is now, is that we can say that and people can laugh because of the Sunday school vibe that we have put upon the Bible. This is why atheists and skeptics and non-believers get upset at believers when they start to see believers acting in a way like we see with Abraham, Moshe, Noah. When we see them, that they're not acting like this passive welcome Matt Flanders, because that's the form of Christianity that they have been sold. That's what Christianity is supposed to be. As if non-believers are supposed to instruct us on what our beliefs are. That gets me worked up a little bit, because that in itself kind of tells me and shows me that most self-identified believers, not all, but most, don't actually read their Bibles. They look to somebody else to feed them. Now, there's nothing wrong with listening to pastors and preachers and teachers. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very scriptural thing. But if that is the only time that you're going through scriptures, is when somebody else is telling you what they understand, then you can't be surprised when your understanding is flawed and lacking some things. Scripture says to search out the matter for yourself. So at the end of verse 24 there, it says, wherefore they say is Saul among the prophets. And I always find that funny, because there's multiple verses that say that. You can go back to 1 Samuel 10, verses 11 to 12. Back to when Saul was being anointed for king. Go to, let's see. Yeah, 1 Samuel 10, verse 10. When they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, talking about Saul, and the Spirit of God came upon him. Sound familiar? And he prophesied among them. This is like mirroring. It's like a reminder to Saul of the beginning. Like, hey, do you remember? Could you imagine, like, you were born again, truly born again, hearing from the Father, have the indwelling, walking in righteousness, and then you get to a point in your walk where you decide to flip God the bird, walk away, and never return back. And then you go to persecute someone who is walking in the way that you used to. And when you go to attack them, the Father allows that day to like perfectly mirror the day you were born again. Because it kind of seems to me that that's what's going on here, that this was a message to Saul. It was God reaching out still and poking at him, saying, hey, do you not remember? Have you forgotten? 1 Samuel 10, verse 10. When they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. Talking about Saul. And it came to pass when all knew him before time saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said one to another, what is this that come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? Verse 12, and one of the same place answered and said, but who is their father? Therefore it became a proverb, is Saul also among the prophets? And when he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place. Now we go to 1 Samuel 19. Didn't we say that Ramah means high place? 1 Samuel 19. It's a recircling. It's a remirroring of 1 Samuel 10. Almost verse by verse in terms of the interaction for Saul. Check the chat here real quick and see if there's anything in here. Any questions, concerns, or comments? We're at just under an hour. We could go into chapter 20, but I'm not so sure that we're going to. Yes. Yes, this is true, Karen. But I plan to go into that in much more depth. And I see multiple onion layers there, and not in the sense of just with Saul, but just in terms of clothing, garment, covering, what it's referencing, why he changed his clothing, what that shows about his mind, his heart, where he's at, and his walking in his journey of life and things. But there's a lot to that. And there's also actually often argued another reason, a logical reason as to why Saul did that. I'm not justifying, I'm just saying. But I think, Karen, I think you and I have talked about that before. Trying to see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns. Hey, real quick though, how cool was that verse in Zechariah? Zechariah 10 verse 2, for the teraphim have spoken vanity and the diviners have seen a lie. Man, sugar skulls on their offering table. Yeah, good call. Yeah, when I did this study for John the Baptist, and I didn't go through all of it because you guys had to listen to me speak in my super Chicago speed of, for like 3 hours. So there were some things that I left out, but you can find that if you look for it throughout the world. Whether you're looking in Australia or African tribes or the islanders, you have all kinds of shrunken heads that all have that same thing. It's beheading of the firstborn, shaving the head, putting herbs and spices. Some of them put a coin under the tongue, some of them don't. Like I mentioned in the Johnny B one, there's legend out there, I don't know if it's true or not, that Herod's wife put a needle through John the Baptist's tongue. All kinds of stuff. Hope I catch on quicker than Saul. Yeah, therefore they've wandered about like the sheep they're afflicted, for there's no shepherd. Karen, I'm telling you, tell me that doesn't fit so nicely. All right, well, there doesn't seem to be questions, comments, concerns. I'm going to keep tonight short, I think, because if we hit into chapter 20, I'm going to have to read through it, and then we go through the notes, and even though there's not much notes, we're looking at another hour and a half, and I got to get up early tomorrow. So I think I'm going to leave it be for tonight, and then maybe next time we do a 1 Samuel video, we'll go through 20, 21, and then maybe 22, because that's always cool with the cave and the priests, right? So that'll be a little bit longer than this one. That would be a fun one. Okay, last call for any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, requests. Yeah, that's understandable, Karen. Right after the Johnny B video, I started a recovery process, and I've still been in an interesting funk. In fact, I would very much appreciate prayers from those who know that the Father hears them. I've been in a funk ever since the Johnny B video. Like literally the moment I got off the camera, the moment I got off, I've been in this mode of what am I doing with my life type of vibe, and I don't like it. So prayers would be appreciated. But there are those within the body who need prayers a lot more than me. There are those within even the Take on the World circles with some serious health concerns that could use a lot of prayer. Yeah, I'm glad to be bringing this study back up too. I like 1 Samuel. I was waiting on the Johnny B for this one. All right, well, there's no questions, comments, concerns. I'm glad you enjoyed the Johnny B video. Okay, there are prayer requests in the chat, folks. Do not dismiss it. Do not ignore it. And when people ask for prayer requests in the chat and things like that, that is crying for help, whether it's from within the body or outside the body. Either way, I'm not saying I know with this individual. I don't, but I'm not going to put things on blast here, but yeah, when you see prayer requests in the chat, let's make sure not to dismiss that. Okay, well, you guys are outstanding. I always tell everybody that I know that does videos and teachings and stuff like that, I say, you guys might have more numbers, you might do better videos than me, but I have the best group of people who tune in, because you guys get very little notice sometimes, like tonight, and you show up and the chat is always full of wisdom and good thoughts and solid questions and concerns and things, and I couldn't ask for a better chat, and it's like that every time. So I just wanted to say that you guys encourage me to keep going, and it's good fellowship for me to have you guys in the chat. So I hope if you tuned in for tonight, especially if you tuned in for the first time, that we see you again. Perhaps we'll continue the 1 Samuel study, Yah willing, next week. This weekend, unless things change, Jeff and I are planning to go into video number 3 of the As in the Days of Noah study. And I think this one's going to be titled something like As Per Usual. Jeff, right? Isn't that the one we're doing next? As Per Usual? Yeah, that should be it. Number 3, As Per Usual. And then the one after that is Corrupted. Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope that Yah used this short and simple study to bless you in your walk with understanding, perhaps to spark some interest and curiosity in the scripture, maybe just to prod you to getting into the adventure again. If you're not familiar with, I do suggest going back through the 1 Samuel studies if you haven't gone through it, maybe putting out 1.5 speed if you can keep up with me at that speed to get through it. I do have a playlist if you're interested, where it's got all of them together. Otherwise, you can go to the DNG 144 playlist at Take on the World TV, and I think they're in there, but I don't think they're in order. Okay. May Yah bless you and keep you according to his will. May his light and his word be a light as a lamp to your feet and guide you in your walk. May he turn his face and his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. Thank you all for coming in tonight. This is DNG 144 reminding you to draw nigh to God, the one true God, the Creator, the one that the whole Bible is about, the one and only one that you can have a true personal relationship with, the one that knows you better than you know you and want what's best for you. No matter where you are in your walk, whether you're walking with him, having been walked with him, starting to walk with him, or never have walked with him, if you seek him in truth and spirit, if you truly, sincerely seek him with your heart, your mind, your soul, if you reach out to him, he will reach out to you, and you will learn that he is very real, or you'll be reminded if you've forgotten. Shalom, shalom. Good night.
Yeah. He's alive. It's really just that simple, man. Draw nigh to God, man. Yeah. Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you. Draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh unto you.